And joining us now is Kamran Bokhari, Director of Middle East Analysis for Stratfor. That's a foreign affairs strategic consulting firm. Kamran, welcome back to TVO. It's good to see you tonight.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay, terrorism, as we have seen, has now moved from the lawless tribal areas to Pakistan City. The Marriott Hotel was destroyed. This is a hotel you know very well. You were married in this hotel, right?
Yes.
You were there a few weeks ago.
Yes.
You know this hotel very well. They're calling this Pakistan's 9/11, the destruction of the Marriott Hotel in Islamabad. Do you know who carried out this attack?
If you look at the target, if you look at the modus operandi, if you look at the context, clearly it reflects the hand of Al-Qaeda. There is a jihadist signature on that attack, and it also represents an escalation of what we've seen so far.
Do you know why Al-Qaeda, if it was in fact Al-Qaeda, do you know why they did it?
Of course. Afghanistan, Pakistan is the final conflict area, and they're looking at how the United States is trying to neutralize what remains of Al-Qaeda and its allies, the Taliban and other actors. So they have to put up a fight. And they see an opening in the weakness of the Pakistani state and or the unraveling of the Pakistani state, and they're going for the opportunity.
Why the move to the big city?
Well, this is not the first time that they've hit a big city. In fact, this hotel has been hit twice before, but in all previous occasions, they weren't able to create that kind of a disaster because of security. I think that they reevaluated their strategy, and they said, you know, we needed a bigger IED to take down this target.
Improvised
An improvised explosive device. And I mean, given the destruction, I mean, clearly this was a much bigger device with a lot more punch than what they used before. In the previous occasion, or at least the last one back in February of 2007, they used a foot soldier, someone wearing a suicide bomber, trying to make his way on foot into the hotel wearing an explosive vest.
Is there a civil war going on in Pakistan now?
You could say that, but civil war is a connotation of two very distinct groups within a country fighting each other. This is still an insurgency because we're not looking at two major groups kind of equally set and balanced trying to gain power.
But are there two groups?
There are definitely, well, there are multiple groups.
I was going to say, it's probably at least two groups, but probably more.
See, what complicates the problem is that when you say jihadist or Al-Qaeda allies, there are too many of them. I mean, the Taliban denied that they had anything to do with it. But we know that the main Taliban group fighting the Pakistani state is not the only ally of Al-Qaeda in that country. They've got other organizations that they work with.
Any of the actors that are involved in, you want to call it a civil war, you want to call it something else, would any of them have nice things to say about the United States?
Of course not. I mean, the fact that they're attacking Pakistan is because they see that the Pakistani state is aligned with Washington in the war against terror or the war against the jihadists, i.e. them. So obviously they won't have any nice things to say about the United States. In fact, they've gone beyond that in the sense that they think that attacking the Pakistani state at this point in time is the best way to undermine.
But I'm including them in my question. Are there even remnants within the Pakistani, Musharraf's gone, are there any remnants within the Pakistani state, the government, that have nice thoughts about the United States?
See, that's where it gets complicated. Those people who are critical of the United States and its policies towards the region, both within state and society, don't really want to live under a Taliban regime or don't agree with Al-Qaeda. I mean, but there is this sentiment that the Taliban and Al-Qaeda are exploiting. And there is this pervasive idea in the society, and it is harbored by many within the state, who think that this is not their war. This is not the war of Pakistan. This is a war of the United States.
Well, let's look at this relationship then, because of course when the so-called global war on terror began, the United States saw Pakistan as a key ally in the prosecution of that war. That alliance is under tremendous strain right now, and I want to go through some of the reasons with you as to why that is. The United States has been launching air and ground attacks in Pakistan's northwest border region. Tell us why.
There are three reasons for it, three broad reasons. First is that after the collapse of the Musharrafian government, the United States has been concerned about continuity of policy. And if you compare what was under Musharraf and what we have right now, clearly there's a sea change because power has devolved or at least dispersed into a variety of institutions and actors. Under Musharraf, he was one-stop shopping. I mean, he was the one calling the shots. He was military chief, he was chief executive, he was president. he wore many hats. Now he has a different military successor who's not the president and who's not the prime minister. It's difficult to work with a government where there's dispersed power, and the United States sees that, and then they see also the complicity of certain elements within the Pakistani security and intelligence establishment who are working with certain jihadist elements, complicating the entire situation. So there's a trust deficit in Washington, and therefore they think that they need to take matters into their own hands. And on top of that, the United States is under pressure to deal with Russia, a resurgent Russia, and they want to wrap up Iraq and Afghanistan. Iraq is on its way to being wrapped up. Afghanistan can't be solved until you deal with the situation in Pakistan. This is their way of dealing with it, because if the Pakistanis can't deliver or are unwilling to deliver, then obviously the United States just can't sit by for them to make up their mind.
What have been the ramifications of the United States taking military action inside Pakistan's borders?
Of course, they've really undermined Islamabad. They've undermined the new government, and of course the military. This new military leadership is already under a lot of pressure, and you see this government also under a lot of pressure at home from its own coalition partners, i.e. Nawaz Sharif of the Pakistan Muslim League, who was a coalition partner with the PPP government led by President Zardari and Prime Minister Yusuf Raza Gilani. He left the government because, for a variety of reasons, one has to do with the domestic political situation, with the restoration of the judiciary. The other is that Nawaz Sharif's party doesn't want to be seen as being aligned with a government that's just basically a continuation of Musharraf's policies. So it's a very difficult balancing act for the government and for the army.
Let me ask you for kind of less analysis on this one and more opinion, if I can put it that way. The United States has felt itself justified going into another country, Pakistan, in order to successfully prosecute its war in Afghanistan. Do you believe they are justified in doing that?
Well, that's a difficult question to
That's what
answer.
I do, baby. I ask them.
Yeah, it's a difficult
Now
question
you
to
gotta
ask,
answer 'em.
and in my professional capacity as a Stratfor official, we really don't offer sort of normative prescriptions, and we don't say what ought to happen. We normally say what will likely happen. But to answer your question, I would say that given the circumstances where the Pakistani state did not have control over these areas, the federally administered tribal areas to begin with were autonomous. The Pakistani army only went in under US pressure in March of 2004. You had that situation, and then the Pakistani army still hasn't been able to establish its control, and it's making deals with militant/tribal elements. When the U.S. sees that, and they say, you know, you don't have control over this area is a staging ground for attacks on our forces in Afghanistan.
I think this is leading to a, therefore I am sympathetic to an argument that. Is that right?
No, what I'm trying to say is that we need to understand the U.S. point of view. I mean, should the U.S. just sit by and wait for the day that the Pakistani government will deliver? Obviously, from the Pakistani point of view, this is totally different. I mean, they're operating under extreme pressure. They're dealing with a very delicate situation at home. Their calculus is completely different.
Okay, let me ask a less nuanced question and a more concrete question. Is it legal, what the United States is doing in Pakistan, the military action they're taking there? Is that legal?
Well, I mean, when you get into legal arguments, then of course you have to go back and say, okay, what was the United Nations mandate after 9/11? How is it being interpreted by the United States? How is it being interpreted by its NATO allies? Obviously, the legal ramification or the legal implications is a thorny subject. But I mean, we at Stratfor deal with what is, or as opposed to what ought to be. And from what I look, I mean, I'm saying that the United States has its difficult situation to deal with, and then the Pakistani government has its own difficult situation to deal with. The question is, can they come to some sort of a working arrangement where they can back away from this brink of a clash or even a crisis in Pakistan?
I want our viewers to know how really close to the ground you are on this file. You and the former president, Pervez Musharraf, you've hung with the guy, right? Can we put it that way?
Well, if you consider meeting him 3 times as hanging, sure.
You had a private dinner with him.
Well, myself along with several other people.
You have had one-on-one meetings with him, though, right?
I met him one-on-one back in January of '07, where things were much rosier for him.
So you have a clear understanding of how integral he was to the successful efforts of the United States in the region. Now that he's gone, what do you think the prospects are?
Well, the prospects have become more complicated because the process of cooperation has become complicated. In the past, it was Washington dealing with Musharraf, a single individual who represented the army, and because he was all in all, there was no need to deal with other actors.
Now they have to.
Now they have to, and that complicates the process, and that is what is also informing this move for unilateral overt strikes.
Let me ask about one of those actors, Asif Ali Zardari. He's the new president of Pakistan. He met with the U.S. president yesterday. Do you know what his position is regarding the war in Afghanistan?
I don't think that he is any different in terms of how this war should be prosecuted than Musharraf.
So he's in favor of it?
He's definitely in favor of it, but in terms of how do you actually prosecute it, the how-to is where he's probably more nuanced.
Is he prepared to help?
He's definitely prepared to help, but for his problem is that he's a civilian. He's not a military leader, and he has to answer to the public. His MPs have to go back to their constituencies. They're dealing with, this is not, their party does not have a strong majority in parliament, so they have to work with their coalition partners as well.
Does he support the war on terror?
Yes, he definitely supports the war on terror.
So he's an ally in Washington.
He's an ally in Washington.
Is that a dangerous thing to be these days?
It is very dangerous, and that's a very difficult balancing act. To be an ally of the United States and yet run Pakistan is a job that I certainly don't envy.
Because Washington, no doubt, wants him to take much more decisive action than his predecessor on cleaning up the Islamic extremist situation in his border areas. On the other hand, he needs to, as you've suggested, balance the domestic considerations at home, where presumably if a poll were taken, Osama bin Laden would get 99% approval ratings. I don't know how well you know the man, but does he seem to you to be the kind of a skilled politician who can balance the two competing interests here well?
Definitely since his wife's death, since former Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto's death, he's definitely shown the ability to lead and the ability to be a statesman. But then again, it's going to take a lot more than just political understanding and being suave about things to deal with this situation. And then again, he's one power broker in that system. The army is another major power broker. So for him to move this wheel and keep it turning, he has to have a good working relationship with the military.
Does he have that?
At this point in time, everything is new. From the military's point of view, they have no choice but to work with him because the alternative is very bad. And that sort of brings me back to your original question. If he can't do it, then I doubt that there's someone else at this point in time who can come in and actually do it because A, his party is the single largest party in parliament. B, the next in line is riding a populist wave, i.e. Nawaz Sharif. He's trying to be, he's trying to develop his own political position based on popular perceptions of what ought to be. And that doesn't jive well for the war on terror. That doesn't jive well for Pakistan's delicate situation right now.
Got a couple of minutes left, and I want to ask you just a couple of more things. We have seen in the past that when the United States decides, you're not really worth the trouble anymore, they can abandon allies pretty quickly. How close do you think they are to that strategic decision about Pakistan?
I don't think that they're close because there are a variety of reasons. One is that the solution to Afghanistan lies in Pakistan. What that means is that Washington would have to work with Islamabad. Granted, that's not happening in any meaningful way right now, but if there is to be a solution to the Afghan dilemma, then they will need to have Pakistan's affairs in order and Pakistan cooperating. So there's that. Number two is that most of the major supply routes for Western forces in Afghanistan run through Pakistani territory.
So is Pakistan now becoming the new front in the global war on terror?
It has been for a long time. In fact, Stratfor has long said that Pakistan is the global headquarters of Al-Qaeda. Most of Al-Qaeda's high-value targets have been captured or killed in Pakistan. And we believe Osama bin Laden, Ayman al-Zawahiri, and the entire leadership is based somewhere in the northwestern area of Pakistan.
Why can't they find them?
It's very difficult. I mean, this is a very large country. People talk about technology, the United States having all the technology in the world and yet not being able to spot these few individuals. But it's not that simple. Technology, electronic intelligence, signal intelligence has limitations in terms of its utility. You really need to have a human element, a human intelligence element, and that's just not there. I mean, given the area, the geography, the demography, and I mean, this
and
is
the family connections.
and
You
the
got to be
family
you got to be a cousin of somebody to get close down there, don't you?
Of course, and the United States has been preoccupied with Iraq for the longest time. That this was not really a high priority as long as Al-Qaeda was not attacking the West, Europe, or the United States, and they were boxed in.
Gotcha. Kamran Bokhari, good of you to join us here at TVO tonight. As always, thanks very much.
It's a pleasure.